Non-negotiables part 2. What do we do when our kids break our non-negotiable rules? This is serious stuff, right? Because we only have 2 to 3 non-negotiable rules. As a reminder, the ones in our family are no drinking, underage, or drug use, and always tell the truth. And let's start out by being obvious. Your kids need to know what your non-negotiables are. You need to be talking about them. You don't need to drill them in every day, but they need to know what they are. Since I think people learn best through stories, I'm going to share a story about what if one of our non-negotiables was broken. And I'll just choose the substance use because that, I guess makes the most sense. And probably a lot of people, I would think a lot of parents would feel the same way about drinking. Underage kid comes home and they've been drinking. Let's start there. First question is, were they driving the car or not driving the car? Let's assume in this case that my underage drinker was also driving the car. I think the consequence would be really clear on that one, right? If they had made the choice to drink and then get behind the wheel of the car, obviously the wheel of the car needs to be taken away. And that's negotiated. And also based on, is this the first time this has happened? Is this a pattern of behavior? Those things are going to come into play when it comes to those consequences. Let's say underage drinker comes home and they weren't driving. A friend was driving. My first question is going to be, was that person drinking? Because I want my kids to feel that they could come and call, or they could call me, and of course we would pick them up. I'd much rather, and I think any parent would much rather pick up their kid and be inconvenienced by that than have their kids, driving around with an unsafe driver. The next thing I'm going to do is not address this while my kid's under the influence, because it's not going to make any sense to do that. I'm going to get my underage drinker safely to bed, and if need be, watch them. Whatever is happening the next day is still going to happen. I mean, we're not going to not go to work in the morning because you're hungover. That's just part of life, right? If you make choices, there are consequences. And the natural consequence of drinking at night is that no matter what's going on the next day, you still got to show up for it. Then, instead of getting angry, I'm going to get curious. I'm going to wonder, knowing that my underage kids know how strongly we feel about this particular rule, and that we have very few rules, what was driving them to make the decision? And that's the conversation that I want to have with my kids. And I'm not going to come from a place of anger. I don't think you have to, as a parent, come down and be punitive and cause your kid to feel like shit in order to get your point across and in order to get their behavior to change. If a consequence does need to be put into place, for example, taking the car away, the car privileges away if you found out that your kiddo was drinking and driving, or I found out my kiddo was drinking and driving, right? That is a consequence that needs to be put into play. The length of time that plays out and how it plays out will have to be talked about based on what's going on in the family and whatnot. But absolutely, there's going to be a consequence there. But the consequences aren't necessarily what teach our kids the lesson. We're going to allow the natural consequences, first and foremost, to teach the lesson. And then ask ourselves if we need to put consequences into place. And if we do, what's appropriate and what's relatable to the offense.